Nambu. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Yawai, my name is Jo Kelly and I'm the Executive Director for Learning the Macleay. I'll be the moderator this afternoon for our webinar, Who Decides? A Conversation About Shared Decision Making, and I'm coming to you from Kempsey on Dunghutti Country. Can you let us know where you're coming from, the lands and the waterways, but I'll do acknowledgement of country first. Place acknowledges the traditional owners of the country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connections to lands, skies, waterways and communities. We pay our deepest respect to Elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. As I said, I'm coming to you from Dunghutti Country. We were going to be stepping through the webinar this afternoon with our amazing panellists. But before we start, just a little bit of housekeeping. All the microphones have been muted and so is the chat function turned off. We would love to hear your thoughts and any questions, so please pop them onto the Slido if you scan the QR code. That will give you direct access. You don't need an account. But today's sessions also will be recorded and placed onto put onto the Place website. At the end of this, Place will publish a summary of FAQs and questions that we don't get to answer today. Before we get to the next bit, I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm coming to you, as I said, from Dunghutti Country. We'd like to extend our acknowledgement to land, sea and the waterways and pay respect to Elders past and present. Also, I'd like to recognise our young people who will step into the role as our future leaders and honour our trailblazers who fought for the fight of social justice as for us to continue on with their legacy. I pay respect also to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the room that are joining us today, and acknowledge our allies who continue to walk beside us in doing the work that we do. Finally, I want to extend my support and our support for the families across our countries that are impacted by sorry business, because there is a lot of that happening across Australia. And we can start to see where people are dialing in from. So we've got Cubby Country, we've got Wurundjeri, some of them I can't pronounce and I won't attempt to as well, but we've got Yorta Yorta, Barongland, Dunghutti Country, Darrell Country, Ngunnawal and Ngambri in ACT. So continue to do that because it'll be great to see the cast of net that we have joining us here today. But I'll give you just a little bit for people to continue to do that, and we can see our group extend as we're going through this. Well, that's happening. Today's conversation is all about shared decision making and practical steps that communities, government and funders can take to put this all into action. We know that when communities are given the seat at a decision making table, transformation happens, but shared decision making requires a shift in ways that funders, government and service providers, as well as community, show up and work together. Today's conversation builds off the Partnership for Local Action and Community Empowerment's new podcast series Making Place Matter on Who Decides. This is a 6-episode series bringing together the perspectives of community, government, philanthropy and service providers on what shared decision making is, why it's important and how to put it into practice and hold each other to account. If you haven't had a chance to have a look, listen to it yet, please make sure you go to your preferred app and download it because it's certainly worthwhile listening to. We've done a little bit of the housekeeping already, so we'll continue through to the next part. But as I said, please go to Slido to put your questions forward, and we will get to the question time at the end of our discussion with the panel. Today, we have 3 amazing panel members. Each will share their lived experience, knowledge and expertise with us as part of this webinar. So joining us today, we have Amy Robinson, Amy is the Executive Director for Greater Shepparton Lighthouse Project, a place-based initiative improving outcomes for children, young people and families. They've been operating since 2018 and she's been able to help shape the project's direction, championing the community-led decision-making and equity with a strong commitment to social justice. Amy also contributes to several advisory boards focused on education and youth development. Our next panel member is Eugene McGarrell. Eugene is a Senior Health and Community Services Executive with over 40 years experience leading large-scale systems reform to help improve mental health, social and population health outcomes. He has held CEO and executive leadership positions across government, primary health networks and not-for-profit organisations with a deep expertise in commissioning, health, equity and mental health and suicide prevention. And our final panel member is Luke Craven, the CEO of Place, where he leads a national agenda to advance community-led, place-based change. His career spans senior roles in government and social impact sector, including leadership in major reforms initiatives across the social policy, employment, community wellbeing. He is recognised for translating complex policy into practical ground-level action. So what we might do is we'll start with the panel and start the questions rolling in. And as I said, continually, if you can have any questions while our panel members are talking, please do so on Slido. So now it's time to listen to what our panel have to share about what shared decision making is all about. We know it's important decision making instead of individual, everybody coming together. Both sides of information share, talk through information and options and agree on what's the best step. In a community setting, shared decision making is about sharing the power over with real decisions, being transparent about constraints, allowing community to define priorities, shaping and designing, and having the opportunity for ongoing feedback and changing if need be, if it's not working appropriately. Now, we know this is really good in theory. In practice, it's a different story because it also brings up a whole lot of challenges with some deep assumption, as Andrew Dawes commented on one of the LinkedIn posts recently. So let's jump in and ask our panellists some information and they will share their knowledge with us. So Luke, you're first in the hot seat. So from your experiences, why is shared decision making so important for place-based sector?
Yeah, thanks, Jo, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be able to be with you and Eugene and Amy for this really important conversation and a great capstone to Place Australia's Making Place Matter podcast. I'll plug it once now and then not mention it again. Please do go to your favourite podcast app and have a listen. 6 great episodes that bring together service provider perspectives, community, government, philanthropy, to really explore, how do we create better outcomes for families, children and communities through shared decisions, through place-based and community-led models. And I guess my jumping off point for this, Jo, is that, there are decades of experience that show us that one-size-fits-all policy approaches don't work. That's a global lesson. It's not unique to Australia, but Australia is unique in lots of ways. It's a diverse and vast country. We have very remote communities, regional places, big urban centres that have vastly different needs, expectations, experiences of challenges like disadvantage, child protection, getting kids ready for school, building safe and healthy communities. And one policy solution that's designed in Canberra or Sydney or Melbourne is never going to land perfectly in those diverse communities. So we need to think about how do we bring those local perspectives to the table to have conversations with the people thinking about and designing those policy solutions so that they fit. And if people have listened to the podcast, they will hear me say that, that fit really matters for 2 reasons. The first is we know that when people are involved in a decision about a program that affects them and their family and their community, they have greater levels of buy-in and they're more willing to engage and participate. So by bringing people to the table around a potential decision, you actually create a broader impact. And then there's buckets of evidence that shows that when solutions like this are co-designed through shared decision-making arrangements, you get better outcomes in the short, medium, and long term. So as many of us have work in this space say and think about, it sounds really simple. It feels like common sense. But the devil really is in the detail and the structures and processes that you use to set up a shared decision-making arrangement where you can share risk and accountability, have the really hard conversations that you need to have in those settings to think through how to progress a shared challenge. So I'll throw back to you, Jo.
Thanks for that, Luke. Yeah, shared decision making isn't easy. And for a lot of our communities, it's new, even though we know the knowledge sits in community, it's not actually respected that way. So we need to bring it more to the table. Our next question is around why did you start down the path of shared decision making? And I'll ask Amy to answer it from the perspective from a community base and what you've done there. And then Eugene, I'll flick it back to you to talk from a commissioning funding position.
Thanks, Jo. Yeah, look, obviously Luke's touched on it there. Fundamentally, it is just at the core of what we do. It's the right way to work, to put community at the centre and listen to their voice. So we find here in Greater Shepparton, when you deeply listen to your community and respond, this approach is empowering in itself, people's voices being heard, but also you get that opportunity to lean into what's strong about your community. What are the strengths, people and their capacity, and the latent resources that you can also leverage around a solution. So yes, as Luke said, you do get greater buy-in, but you also get that opportunity to lean into what's strong instead of looking at what's wrong. And by putting people at the centre and shifting power and sharing that decision-making, it's just fundamentally you get better outcomes. People are the experts in their own lives. So to not make assumptions about what response is required, what program, what change, to actually listen deeply and work with community to co-design that is fundamental to our way of working here at Lighthouse. And I guess why also did, apart from it being common sense, in Greater Shepparton at the time Lighthouse formed, we had some pretty poor outcomes that our community was no longer willing to accept. And we thought, well, there's so many great services in the town, there's high investment, but yet we're not shifting the dial on some of these real wicked social challenges around health and education and wellbeing outcomes for our children and young people. So Lighthouse formed leadership tables, a board formed, and we thought, let's listen to the community. So we went out and did 1,000 conversations. We took what we heard. We also looked at the population level data, and we put a whole host of different thinkers around the table and started that journey to co-design responses with our community based on what we heard. So they essentially set the strategic priorities for Lighthouse and more broadly for our town.
Thanks for that, Amy. It was good that you talked about the strength within the community already and not just focusing on the negative, because unfortunately a lot of the negatives outshine the strengths that we have in our community. Eugene, I'll ask you the same question, but as I said, if you can come from the perspective of a funder and commissioner, so why did you start down the path of shared decision making? And from that context of the funder and commissioner.
Thank you, Jo. And I also want to say thank you for inviting me onto the panel with Luke and Amy. It's a real privilege to be on the same panel as you guys, so thank you for that. Look, I think I got to that phase over a number of decades, as realizing at first as a nurse and as a clinician back in the day, we were told that decisions are best made as close to the patient as possible. And we, at that stage, we were asking the question, well, why can't the patients themselves make those decisions? And then, over time, as a manager and an executive, all the mistakes that we've made in the past, designing perfect service models and service systems and implementing them in community and wondering why they didn't work, and getting the feedback that you do keep on coming and consulting with us and nothing changes. You keep on doing the same thing and reacting the same way. And so over time, learning that lesson that actually we probably need to do it in a very different way. And for me, one of the good examples is at Greenway Housing Estate, when I was working for Family and Community Services there, commissioning housing and child protection and disability services. We looked at developing a brand new wellbeing service for the Greenway residents. But to cut a long story short, after 6 months, they basically said to us, look, just give us the room. We'll run the service. You just get out of the way. And it soon became quite clear that the wisdom was in the community. It wasn't in the bureaucratic offices where we were sitting. And so over time, now working in Sydney North Health Network as a commissioner, it's very clear that I'm lucky to work with an organisation and a board who have said to us that the wisdom is in the community. Work out what the community need and work out how the community wants those services tailored for them, and meet them where they are. And so we're now going down this road of developing neighbourhood health hubs for these communities and with those communities, without having a preconception of the design of those programs. And the more and more we do that, the better the results. And so it just seems that over time, that's been a lesson that I've learned.
Thanks for sharing that, Eugene. Talking about the experience that you had over the number of years, but the patients making decisions is very important, and handing that power over.
I know I don't look that old, but
no, you don't look that old at all. But nothing changes.
Yeah.
And again, that's the same in a lot of communities where we go and consult on a regular basis. Nothing changes, and we're still in the same place that we were 5, 10, 15 years ago. The next lot of questions that I want to ask is, and Amy, I'll go to you now. What processes do you use to gather community input, and how does the community voice show up in the decision making?
Thanks, Jo. Yeah, look, I mentioned earlier our 1,000 conversations, which first commenced in 2015. We repeat our 1,000 conversations every 2 or 3 years, and that is exactly as it sounds. We go out to community, all pockets, a real cross-section of our community, and speak to 1,000 people. And over half of those voices are young people under the age of 25. And so that's our biggest form of hearing that connection to community voice and what are their priorities. We also have a new method that we've commenced this year called Slice and Say, which is a pizza party kind of vibe where young people come along and grab a slice and have their say. And that's a fun approach, but it's a sort of real-time activation of the 1,000 conversations. So we're prioritising what we hear, and we're having that chance to pick up on new and emerging changes and need in our community so that we can be super responsive to meet that need. We also have survey tools. So we evaluate through Social Ventures Australia under a social return of investment methodology. And so we're collecting information from the participants of our programs, our Family Haven, our Youth Hub, our hands-on learning programs, from our volunteers working in schools. So, yeah, we're gathering those insights for continuous improvement all the time. We also have a youth leadership table at our Ollie youth space. So Ollie stands for Opportunities and Lifelinks for Youth. And really, I think, those informal ways of just picking up feedback and emerging need and co-designing. A co-design process, I think, co-design is a term that gets thrown around quite a bit, but doing co-design well is core. And I think it's sort of an evolving cycle, and always taking on board feedback and making sure that our response is hitting the mark and meeting the needs of our community is really important. That's how we gather all the input in a more formal sense, but what we then do with it is really important. And I think, you know, looking at the population level data, as well as what we heard in 1,000 conversations and our feedback, we sort of blend all that together and set our strategic priorities. They're not just priorities for Lighthouse. We use it for advocacy. We look at whose work is this? Is there a gap? We don't need to get in there and deliver programs necessarily. It's about elevating it. So, you know, whose job is this, and how do we elevate the needs so that we can, might be strategic partnerships. It might be about using what we heard to leverage resourcing and funding. And I think, you know, when we talk about there's such an enabling factor within the way communities are funded, and I really want to lean into that just quickly. But you know, when philanthropies show up and work with communities in a way where trust is at the core, it's a game changer. And we also have been really lucky at Lighthouse Project to have received funding through the Department of Education. But that funding model is a flexible and place-based funding model. And that's been just so impactful for us, because really what we're delivering on is not what we think the work is and where the impact is. It's actually the community's priorities get embedded within our deliverables and our KPIs. They're really, we're delivering on behalf of the community. And I think there is that tension sometimes as a place-based initiative to think about what is success, and is it growth or is it impact? And I think sometimes there's a challenge that you can look to growth as being scale and start looking to gain funding for other things that take you away from the core mission of what you're setting out to achieve. And for us, listening to our people, using our 1,000 conversations, grounding our priorities and matching our funding in that way is just a core for us to be able to deliver on community need and emerging need.
Thanks, Amy. Really interested in Ollie, and particularly the pizza conversations. We had 18 young people in our office yesterday afternoon as part of our youth engagement team, and pizza was on the table, but they certainly know how to eat that a fair bit and quickly as well. But yeah,
great cook.
It is, and I also like the fact that you know, the youth space is so important right now, and we need a lot of time to be able to grow them into our leadership roles for the future. And these opportunities we need to be making available on a regular basis rather than a one-off. So looking forward to hearing more about that. Eugene, as a commissioner, how have you changed your processes to give community a greater voice in decision making, and what impact has that had? I'm at the same.
Yes. So for me, I think the biggest impact is understanding that you need an authorizing environment to allow you to really and truly delegate decision making to community. And I think without that, and without clarifying that and getting the right governance around that, it all becomes a wish list rather than having the authority to make that delegation. And so from experience, I've learned that without doing that work first, that you can then go into community, raise expectation, say you'd promised to do X, Y, and Z and not deliver. And then the next time somebody comes to ask you, what can we do for you? The community tell you they've had enough. So it's really important to get that authority to do that work. The other thing is really being open to listening to voices that you don't necessarily want to or will make you feel uncomfortable. Just recently we had a 3-day event out at Wiseman's Ferry where we had community, voice, lived experience, service providers and other stakeholders join us for 3 days, day and night, and really get to know each other, but do some really good work and strong work on co-design and how we're going to develop these local neighborhood health hubs. And the hard conversations were the conversations that really got got us to the gold and the diamond of what was really needed and was felt was important by community. And at the end of that 3-day event, what I realized was that actually allowing the process to develop those outcomes and being open to hearing, different views and being open to, I guess, challenging some of your own beliefs and being wrong was really an important part of that particular process. So the courage to engage and to devolve decision making is important, but it's really also important to make sure you've got support from your board and your organization to make that happen.
Yeah, I think, again, hearing everybody's voice is important, so that they feel like they're being listened to. And I'm sure that the 3-day event was very engaging and about all of that stuff moving forward.
It was great. It was great. And the work that's gone on since then and the motivation and it's been an amazing experience.
Cool. Now, Luke, I'm going to circle back to you and actually a question about what are some challenges for communities and funders in moving into shared decision making? Because for our community here on Duncati Country, it's really interesting at the moment when we've got pockets of shared decision making happening, but it's not informal, it's very informal. But what's some of the challenges that you know of across Australia?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And to, I guess, build on some of what Eugene just shared, I think being really clear about the authorising environment for shared decision making in a particular place and community is essential to get this right. And that also involves being clear up front about what decisions are on the table to be made in a shared and collaborative way and which ones aren't. So in a lot of good practice and good examples of this across the country, the kind of decisions that get shared are a funding decision is coming up. How can government and community jointly make a decision about which service provider is funded, for example, to deliver a particular mental health service? So that might be one kind of decision that can be shared. Or it might be in the context of a ceasing grant round where a program is coming to the end. The decision is, do we continue that program in the same way it operates? Do we do it differently? Does the same service provider get it? Is it time for a change? What does the partnership model look like if that service is operating in an Aboriginal community? Does it need to be transitioned to an ACO? Like, those are the kinds of decisions that are quite commonly made through shared decision-making arrangements. But if you don't have clarity around that authorising environment at all levels, so from the minister down to the department, down to the departmental staff that, Joe, as we were talking yesterday, are the ones that sit around the table with you and have to make those decisions. If there's not alignment and clarity on that authority, it becomes really hard to do it well. And it just creates complication and complexity. The other point I would make is about the informal versus formal spectrum. So all good place-based work is built on relationships. And for everyone listening along in the context of their own work, whether you're a service provider, a community organisation or government, you know deep down that the best work that you can do in this space is where you've known particular people for a long time, you've worked together in the trenches, you've seen things go right and wrong. There's a level of trust that enables you to have those conversations. Trust is an important enabler of shared decision-making, but it's an informal element of shared decision-making. And if you don't have the formal structures in place, when things start to go wrong or they get more challenging, it's harder to keep something going. So, in the context of a commercial relationship, we all have contracts. Contracts often sit in the bottom drawer for a rainy day, or they get pulled out of that drawer when things go wrong. You obviously don't want shared decision-making arrangements to go wrong, but you need to know what the boundaries are. And there needs to be that level of formality to it so that when people are going off in the wrong direction or they're exhibiting behaviours that are not consistent with what's required to get a collaborative decision through, you can say, actually, we agreed to do this in a different way. And we did set some boundaries and some ground rules to enable this to work effectively in the good days and the bad days of this arrangement. So I think, to summarise that, Joe, I think the authority question and the authorising environment is really key. And if you can't get clarity on that, it's almost not worth doing. And then when you've got that authority, you need to then go, how do we put some formal structures in place? So this is about more than just trust and relationships. Because trust and relationships are good when the sun shines, but you do need some of those hard boundaries when it gets more challenging. And there are always going to be hard conversations in the context of this work.
Totally agree, Luke, with everything you said. And as we know, our work is relational, but the boundaries need to be clear from the outset, so there's no forced expectations that will change the way we operate in the future. Because I know, again, from our community, we've had a lot of things happen here. We've had a lot of programs come and start and stop. Expectation is higher than what it really is. And then we have to rebuild that trust back in community in order to continue with a new opportunity that can come to us at all.
Yeah, and Joe, maybe to just share something that Catherine Little said on the podcast. I still see it commonly where, with all the best intentions, a funder will show up in a community and say, we want to do shared decision making here, and are surprised when they get rolled eyes in response, because community organisations and community members have seen that and heard that language time and time again over decades, and haven't seen the results change, or haven't seen the process that funders are willing to work through change in line with the language. So there is a trust building piece here as well. And sometimes I think it's better to start small and pick something that you can make a shared decision on quite quickly that's going to have a good impact. But rather than trying to kind of boil the ocean in the first 3 months of a relationship where you are still in that trust building phase.
Yeah, totally. And I know from our end here again on Dunghutti Country, we've had so many pilots come into our community, pilot programs, and we often say that, we should be an international airport, with the number that have come and gone over the decades that have led our community down a garden path, and then nothing's come back. So it's really hard handing over the trust, handing over the shared decision making, when we have to get community also to understand that this is a new language. Even though we've been doing it for years on the ground, the community-led collective impact, social impact, conversation and language is very different to what we've been known for many years. Thanks for all three of your input in terms of the shared decision-making stuff. We'll move into the next part of this webinar. It's around accountability. So, after a decision has been made, how do we go through to make sure that the decision actually sticks? Too often, many communities see decisions being made and then nothing happens, which we've just, briefly touched on. And I'm bringing in my perspective, it's like a Teflon pan. We make the decision, but nothing sticks. So we need to work out how do we stop the slipping motion and turning the decisions into action, accountability and real change on the ground. So Amy, can you tell us a little bit more about the great work the Lighthouse Project has done around data and community insights? And can you walk us through some of the process of bringing community into monitoring and accountability?
Great. Yes, so I touched on a little bit earlier, but our monitoring and evaluation processes are really important to get a feel for from our participants, from our families and our young people engaging in the work we do. Are we having the intended impact? Now, that's really important, not just because it's empowering people again to check in with, well, are we doing what we said we were going to do with you? But it's also, I guess, about, any investment that comes in for small not-for-profits and place-based initiatives, whether it's $500 from a local Rotary Club, or whether it's $200,000 from a philanthropic or larger government investment, we know that our resources are so scarce. Obviously, that I think it's a values thing that we want to do the very best we can. We need to stretch every dollar and have the biggest bang for buck. And so picking up that feedback, whether informally or through the surveys, and having that opportunity to pivot where you need to make those continuous improvements in real time is so important, because the stakes are so high. These are people's lives that we're walking alongside and helping to support. So it's just, again, it's the right way to go about it. But yeah, we do have the formal structure around our survey tools through our monitoring and evaluation process. They link to our outcomes framework and are essentially proving up our theory of change. We also have other ways of utilising community data and embedding accountability. We have had a 10-year relationship with SEER Data and Analytics. So I've got an amazing data lead here at Lighthouse Project, Sarah Payne, and she leads some amazing work with local partners, Communities for Children through Catholic Care Victoria in our region, and our local council's Best Data Initiative and Lighthouse are co-contributing partners to delivering on the State of Greater Shepparton Children's Report. So that's about unlocking data sets that aren't available within our community and putting it all in one accessible place so that our community has access, and our people and our decision makers can see what's going on and track and monitor change. So I guess that's a real formal way of having that accountability. And yeah, I think it's the thing I love about the data platform, and I would encourage people to check it out. So you do an amazing job. But again, we're highlighting some of the challenges we have in our region, but we're also using it as an opportunity to bring community voice in there by highlighting case stories, small videos and snippets and solutions across the region that are bright spots that are working well and could be scaled. So it's a real community asset, and it's about making that data available to our people because it is their data.
Yeah, and it's about that data ownership. So once community know they can access and it sits on where it's accessible, that makes it a lot easier as well. Just another question, a follow-up question on that is, how has that helped funders to understand performance and opportunities for improvement?
Yeah, well, look, we can be really specific when we're applying for a grant funding. We can be really specific with setting deliverables based on our community. So again, it's community need that drives us to apply for the resourcing, but we can also set really clear KPIs around, if it's a young person in our hands-on learning program, what is the degree to which you feel this has increased your aspiration or your confidence to transition into the world of work. So really specific questions that are targeted around, are we delivering on what we said we're going to deliver on? And I think when we talk about the funders' role in this, I think it's really important, and philanthropy particularly do a really great job of investing in this. And I want to give one small example. Lighthouse has been working on a collaboration with the Open Dialogue Centre of Australia, Berry Street Urella, and our local health provider, GV Health, and our infant, child, youth mental health service. And it's a really community-led solution to addressing poor mental health outcomes in our young people and working in a preventative way. So a systems change piece that empowers young people, puts their voice at the centre and enables them to have a say in their mental health journey. So this is a whole of community approach whereby we're working with local youth services, the local Greater Shepparton Secondary College, our Lighthouse youth sites and settings, through Berry Street's youth foyer and residential sites, and also through the mental health service. So we've been really lucky to have some bold investment through the William Buckland Foundation and Equity Trustees to work with us, and they've come to the table and listened deeply, and so much so that the KPIs around how we measure success are all co-designed. They're resourcing young people, lived experience roles that are embedded within the project, so that we've got that embedded accountability in the co-design, the implementation, and even through the reporting. So when we're doing our acquittals, we're having young people's voice literally speaking directly to the funders. They're in the room prioritising the outcomes with the funder, with community, with the service providers, and with young people experiencing the challenge. So I think, I think it's shifting in a really positive way. And I think we all know that, you know, when you work in this way, it's efficient, it's effective, it gets better outcomes. And it's great to see that it's not just a buzzword, it's literally being embedded within the structures that we're seeing within the work we're doing in our town.
Sounds really good, the work that you're doing, Amy, and particularly the importance of collaboration and partnerships, but also how philanthropy can lean in and help support what's happening on the ground. Eugene, I have a couple of questions for you now. How does accountability look to community? Like, how does it look different to traditional accounting and to government and funders? And let me know if I've mucked that up, because I can repeat it again with proper English if need be.
I'm just really trying to think that through. For me, as a commissioner, accountability means a lot of things, and you can have the best researched service model, the best evidence-based model, the best consulted model and co-design model that there is, and when it comes to putting it on the ground, it can fail. And it can fail because we haven't got the right accountability environment there. We haven't engaged people in the community well enough. We haven't assessed the context of the community, and at 3 levels. So that's the highest strategic level, it's the regional level and local level as well. We haven't really understood what the forces are competing to distract or debunk a service model. When you're working in a competitive market, which the NGO sector is, that can actually have an impact on the service model. So if you don't have a situation in place in the community where you've got a collaborative service ecosystem, so to speak, then that can distract you from that model. So it's really important to think through the service model in that context, but also going back to what Luke was saying, that you need to start small with any service model that you're putting in place in community, and we need to do that to understand whether it's the way we implement the service model that is failing, or whether it's the model itself that's failing, and vice versa. Is it the way that we're implementing that's making it perform well? And I've seen so often large national service model that have been implemented, they just don't they're not taken up. They're not taking up because people don't need them. I mean, it looks great, but people don't sense, they feel that they need those service models. So doing it in a small way helps us test those assumptions that we've made, to test our very nice theory of change that looks great on the whiteboard, but does it actually mean a whole lot in community for a whole range of people with different sorts of needs, and has it been developed in a way that is meeting a felt need for that community? So for me, going to answer that question directly, accountability at community level looks like, are they using it? Are they accessing it? Are they getting the support they need? And are the outcomes that the community want? And are we meeting the community in the place that wants us to meet them at?
That's good. I like the fact that, you know, when you're starting small, you try and get it right before you expand out, because once you go big, it's really hard to come back into
and then you chase your tail because you've spent so much on it. You want it to work.
Yeah. Follow-up question for you too, Eugene, is how do you manage the tensions between what government wants and what community want? Because I know how difficult that can be.
I don't always manage it very well. So it takes a Henry Kissinger sometimes to really manage that, the competing needs and demands of the politicians, the government departments, the bureaucrats, and other stakeholders and other competing providers. I think the only thing you can do is to be humble in that space. And what I mean by that is to understand this is people come from different perspectives. They have different paradigms. They've got different drives. I've worked as a bureaucrat. I understand the drives of bureaucracy. I think if you don't acknowledge that and understand that, then there's no way that you can really form the partnerships that need to be formed going forward. And the other thing is sometimes the partnerships don't work, and sometimes the relationships don't work. And I find the best way to move forward is to go where the energy is. So to target those that want to work in that way, and then get the successes, and then you find the system follows over time.
Yep, I again agree with that too, because we do that. It's like you go full into the community, people are active, they want to be a part of it. That enthusiasm drops off, but they still want to know, and then they'll come in and out and test the waters when they are ready for it.
100%.
Back to you now, Luke. What are some approaches to accountability that can address the power imbalance between community, government and providers?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Another really impossible question. And just to really back in, I think, some of Eugene's perspectives there, that it takes constant work to balance competing needs, agendas, perspectives, and there's never kind of a simple solution that will hold for the long term. Like it's consistent work. There are some great examples in kind of the Australian practice space where this is done particularly well. So the Macleay regional deal based in Tennant Creek in the Northern Territory, where there's a shared decision-making table involving all three levels of government, so Commonwealth, Territory, local government. It involves a number of key community groups, including the Macleay Aboriginal Alliance. It involves local businesses as well, have a seat at that table. There are some designated seats for young people. So what's really powerful about the Macleay regional deal as an example, and it's not perfect by any measure, and it's been a really hard model to build and sustain, but you have all of those competing interests and agendas sitting around the same table together, being able to build relationships, build trust, hear those perspectives. So when a bureaucrat says, I really just can't do it that way, and here's why, people in other seats can go, yep, that makes sense. I'm not asking you to do something that's impossible for you. So how do we then think about how we could do it differently, or what a workaround is? And the same goes for like a local Aboriginal medical service that also operates under constraints and maybe is not able to do everything that local community members need at a particular moment. The other interesting thing about the Macleay regional deal model is that it has an independent chair. And so there is someone sitting at the table whose role it is to be a Henry Kissinger or an independent facilitator of those conversations that doesn't have skin in the game and can be there to listen to those different perspectives, facilitate, mediate, help people be humble, help people see the other perspective. And I think in my experience, particularly where you have big multi-stakeholder arrangements, that independent facilitation is invaluable and is often the thing that unlocks progress, particularly when things are really sticky or hard to move because of a conflict or because of a difference of perspectives. So there's no substitution for like grit and really trying to make it work. There's no substitution to locking people in a room and getting them to know one another and trust one another. But I also want to back in, I think the thing that both you and Eugene said, Joe, which is it's also important to know when to walk away from these things. like all relationships, there's kind of a sunk cost bias. You go, well, I've invested so much into that. Like that working group's existed for 3 years. We couldn't possibly walk away from it now. Well, I think the principle is if it's not adding value, if you're not able to get progress out of it and it's just getting everyone frustrated, then try something else. Don't hold on to a particular way of working if it's not generating results. But again, that takes a particular kind of bravery and humility when people have invested often lots of time and personal political capital and emotional energy in these things. But you've got to know when to hold them and when to fold them on these things. And I think that's an important element of how we continue to build the understanding that shared decision-making is a useful tool, but it's not going to be suitable to every context or decision.
Yeah, as soon as you started talking about no one to walk away, I started having the Kenny Rogers song in my head playing back at everything. So, yeah, independent facilitation is good. Like we don't have that here, but it's something that potentially could work and push things along a bit further. We now have a bit of time up our sleeves. So I'm going to ask some questions that have already come through from Slido to the three of you. And some of it to start with will be around the shared decision-making conversation that we had not long ago. A question for you, Luke, is what would you suggest for anyone thinking about how to implement shared decision-making?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So I think start small, as Eugene and I have already said. Go where the energy is. Go where you have those trusted relationships. Make sure that you have the right authority and accountability frameworks in place. You don't have to overcook it, but make sure that you've got that stuff there because it comes back to bite you if you don't. And think about how you can document the process. So, as we've talked about and others have talked about on the podcast, this looks different. You can have really formal mechanisms like local decision-making agreements or the Macleay regional deal. You can have a working group, like many place-based initiatives do across the country with the terms of reference that says, here's how we're going to work together. Here's how we're going to make decisions. Here's what we're going to do when things get a bit crunchy. I think it's really important to do the work of documenting that. And to do some of those, as all of us have said, this is hard work. It's often challenging. So when you're doing that work of designing what a particular shared decision-making arrangement looks like, hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And think about, when this goes wrong or when we do something and a community leader might be offside or not entirely satisfied with the decision that's been made, what will we do then? And do that thinking up front, have those conversations so that you set yourself up for success.
Yeah, thanks for that, Luke. Just a reminder, if you have any additional questions, just send them through to Slido. I'm checking my phone for the questions that are coming in from the team that's working behind the scenes. So a question for you, Eugene, is how do you deal with conflicts of interest when community members also work for service providers or the local government?
Oh, wow.
That's an easy question. It's really easy.
Well, yeah, I think the main thing is honesty, that people declare their conflict, because I find that most so-called conflicts of interest are often misunderstood. And people think it's a barrier to, working together or getting things done. So I think it's really just about saying what you think your conflict of interest is and looking at ways to manage our way through that. And for me, it's really important we don't put more barriers into more partnerships and getting work done together and improving outcomes for people. So yeah, I think it's just about making sure everyone's transparent and having that culture in place.
Yeah, transparency is so important when we're working, particularly in a community context.
Yeah.
Amy, one of the questions that have come through for you is, how do you ensure that all of the community is heard and not just a selected few? Because you talked about your 1,000 voices and your surveys, like it's the broader community as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So during the 1,000 conversations process, we have the opportunity that anyone can register. So it's highly promoted within our community because we've been doing it for so long. So many people know what it is, so they get that opportunity to opt in. But we also sit behind the scenes with our team and create a really big database of a cross section of the community. So we're out at drug and alcohol rehabilitation centres, working with kids in the justice system, alternate education sites and settings. We did the whole of Year 10 at the Greater Shepparton Secondary College, which was about 330 students at one time. So yeah, multicultural community, our First Nations community. So we really tailor it to where do people feel safe and comfortable? What is their space? And would they enable us to work with them to come in and host those conversations? And I think the other thing, particularly when we're talking about younger people, sometimes people aren't that comfortable in voicing their opinion in a setting, and even if it's a small group setting of 8 or 10 people. So we're really conscious in the design of the consultation that people can use a QR code and punch in their responses. They can use sticky notes, they can draw. So there's multiple ways of having the voice heard, but we really do that stock take beforehand to make sure that we are getting out to the right places in community.
Thanks for that. Luke, questions have come through for you. What would you suggest for anyone about to implement shared decision making? Or did I already ask that? I didn't ask that already, did I?
That's pretty similar to the one you already asked.
Yeah. I just realised that. I'll flick through to the other ones. There's another one for you, Luke. Sorry. Is there anything available that shows you how to do shared decision making and that can help you figure out where you might need to build the skills?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And I wonder if that's a Dorothy Dixer from one of my team. So do go onto the Place Australia website. We have a shared decision-making guide available that is designed to help people that are at different stages of doing this work, from the very beginning to scoping what it might look like in your community or context, right through to more established initiatives that are thinking about kind of formal shared decision-making agreements with philanthropy or government. So do go and check that out. The other thing I would say on conflict of interest, this is a really timely conversation. I think there are lots of questions being asked as shared decision-making arrangements become more formal, particularly in a public sector context, and particularly in communities that are smaller. So, under 20,000 people, or even in the kind of 20,000 to 50,000 band. When you are making shared decisions in those contexts, you do need to be mindful of conflicts, as Eugene said, without going overboard, and recognising that the first and most appropriate way to manage them is for people to declare them and to follow that through as you would any other process. The Place Australia team's also working on some tools to help community organisations that are doing shared decision making with conflicts of interest.
Yeah, conflicts of interest can be really critical, particularly also in a community context when you're working with a whole range of providers and community are calling them out as well, which they often do on a regular basis. Eugene, I'm a bit curious about the authorising environments. So can you give us a spiel on about what the elements of these have been useful and helpful at enabling organisations to genuinely relinquish the power in shared decision making?
Yeah, so I think the technical answer is making sure you've got the right MOUs in place, the right strategic plans in place, you've got the right reporting and accountabilities and the right delegations in place. So that's the boring but important stuff. But actually, in reality, the real way that you get the authorizing environment is through the relational work you do within the organization and with those other organizations that have a stake in your organization. So for us, as a primary health network, the Department of Health, of Aging and Disability, they have a stake and they need to be involved in the conversation. So to get that authorizing environment, it really is about having the conversation, assessing the risk appetite for those stakeholders, talking about the outcomes that we're aiming to achieve and bringing them on the journey. And for us, that's taken us about 2 years to get to where we're going to get to. The easy bit was the MOUs and the agreements and the strategic plan, because you could just write those. But in reality, that all falls down if you haven't got the foundation, which is the commitment and this way of working, and the understanding that delegated decision making means you are losing some of your power, and that's quite scary for a lot of people in some senior positions. So you've got to do a lot of work in that space.
Yeah, losing power is hard to manage. And again,
none of us have actual power, actually, but it's that sense of power, that loss, that really, well, that's my view anyhow.
Yeah, and perception really dictates a lot of conversation, unfortunately. Yeah. I have a question to you, Amy. Do you believe there is a genuine shift within government to accept place-based approaches and or recognise that these approaches will improve impacts? And are there any champions that you know of?
Yeah, sure. Great question. Look, I think our place-based flexible funding model, as I said, is administered through the Department of Education, and it's been a 10-year relationship, and it's been a journey, and it wasn't easy at the start. There was a lot of different ways of working that we needed to work through, and I think that key around how do you build trust and I think now what we see with this established relationship, we are able to report in a way that's so powerful, because I think, the appetite to work in this way has really got to be grounded in strong governance. So not-for-profits and place-based initiatives that have really good, strong governance structures led by community voice embedded, great impact measurement, and an ability to tell that impact story. I think that's really powerful. And I think that's something that we have found within our funding model. It's enabled us to now talk about what else we've leveraged off the back of this investment that's been really powerful. So not only the in-kind, the latent resources that are leveraged, the local contributions, but the contributions from philanthropics as well. So I think it's seen as a strength that working in this way is just better bang for buck, and it gets great outcomes. We also locally have a place-based education plan working in our region. Obviously the Department of Social Services work in this way. We've picked up a little bit of support to do some early intervention work addressing local need within our Family Haven initiative as well. So through Communities for Children and Department of Social Services, we're seeing that flexibility is enabling real impact in our community as well. So they're probably top of the mind. It's definitely a journey, and it's great to see that there's so much interest in how to better connect the dots between communities, people, communities, and government and philanthropic investment.
Yeah, because all of them collectively play a very important role together. What I'd like to ask the three of you, and it's purely from my perspective, in terms of working in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, who is your reach out person first? Or who's the person you go to first to start the conversation?
And I'm happy to jump in first on that, Joe, to give Amy and Eugene a second to think. And it connects to an answer I was going to give to the earlier question about who speaks for community, is 1,000 voices enough in big communities, which I think are good, challenging questions. My response to this is, if you're engaging in community in the right way, it's really easy to figure out who the right people to talk to are. Because you can ask a couple of, a range of people, who do you think I need to have in the room? Who do you think are the people that speak for, whether it's First Nations or core community in this particular place? And if you're hearing the same answer again and again, then that gives you a level of confidence that that particular person has the community authority and authorization to speak on behalf of a particular segment of the community. So it's often not the people with the formal titles. And I think that's the important principle. If you're entering a community and you're going, who are the people that have the big important formal titles here, and I'll go and talk to them first, you're probably not going to be talking to the right community perspectives off the bat. But if you're engaging with different community members, different community leaders, different service providers, and asking that question, who do you think are the people in this community that have authority to speak on behalf of different segments of the community, you will get told. And so it's about listening first rather than making assumptions about who you engage with.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in there as well. So yeah, I agree with what Luke has just put forward there. And I think, through our co-design processes, having young people, so I think it's about 38% of young people attending some of our programs are First Nations young people in the region. So having them involved in the co-design, that certainly through our 1,000 conversations, we're really elevating and highlighting the lived experience and the voice of our First Nations community. And also, I guess when I was talking about that mental health initiative that we've started this year as a collaboration, our local Rumballara Aboriginal Cooperative certainly are a partner within that collaboration. And so working in ways and taking on board their rich perspectives in the actual co-design and the delivery and setting the priorities is really important. And I think, for us, it happens at a really grassroots level and based around tangible actions and projects.
Well, Eugene?
For me, there are two elders, two aunties that they come to me quite often. They ring me and tell me there are things that we need to do. So they're not backwards in coming forward, but I go to them to talk to them about what we're planning, sense test stuff, hear what's going on in the communities as well, and understanding where the current dynamics are and where also to go to. So they often lead me to talk to other people. And as I'm invited, that sort of opens up that sphere of influence.
Oh, and it's really hard sometimes, but as you said, Luke, you ask around and people will say who it is that you need to talk to. I have a couple more questions that's just come through, and it's one for each of you two as well. So I'll go back to Amy. How do you support community to participate as equal partners?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think our organisation, I've got an amazing team of people that work for me, and I think the common thread is that our values drive our leadership and there's sort of no egos. Egos are at the door. So I don't know that, it's an interesting question because we do see ourselves as equals, and I think, the basis of how Lighthouse started, giving everyone a voice, elevating, empowering those voices that weren't heard, I guess was wasn't why we did it, but I think it established a lot of respect in the community across the business community, the service providers, and the families and young people that we interact with. So, I wouldn't say that there's a power imbalance in the way we go about and interact with our community through our work.
Yeah, it's good to understand the power imbalance, and particularly in community, so that it's seen to be equal. Because again, once somebody does something else outside those boundaries, it becomes a little bit hard to navigate. Eugene, another question for you. What has helped shift practice in your organisation towards shared decision making?
Well, I think generally that Sydney North Health Network is full of good people who really want to do good things. And so it's not, you don't need to convince anybody. So we've got great teams working here, but also the leadership at the board level, the chair, the CEO, they're all driven to do good, and they all get it. They all understand that really to make a difference as a primary health network, we don't get a lot of funding. And the only way we can get real outcomes is by connecting the system together to deliver outcomes with community. And they just get it. So it was more about designing the how to rather than this is what we wanted to do. So there was a clear understanding by the organization from everybody that this is the direction of travel. So that makes my job a lot easier. The real question is how we were going to do that, and how we're going to do that in a way that had guardrails, was going to manage the risk, and really to understand the risk appetite of the board was really, really important, because they don't want cavalier people going out there in a cavalier way, sort of promising everything. They wanted to have, and still want to have, a discipline of how we're going to implement and deliver this for community. So that was really, it's just the how to, designing that, but the intent, I think, was there well before I got to the organisation, so I was lucky.
And it's good when you're stepping and it's already set up and you just continue the charge rather than having to create it.
Yeah.
Got a question for you, Luke. What do you think would help move shared decision making to mainstream?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And I think the kind of simple answer to that question is more examples of how, like, where it works, how it works, and how it's making a difference. And as I said on the podcast, I think the kind of the glass ceiling for shared decision-making work is that probably 95% of the examples that are happening across the country are informal. So they haven't taken that leap into formalizing that into structures that outlast particular people or particular relationships. And as we start to see more formal shared decision-making and more examples of how it can make an impact, I think it'll be more widely accepted as a mainstream approach to this work. Maybe though, to connect this to another question I've seen come up in the Slido, which is a little bit to the question that was asked to Amy as well, about like, how do you get community to participate in this as equal partners? How do we think about funding community to be active participants in shared decision making? So from a place-based change perspective, the role of the backbone team or organisation, whether you use that backbone language or not, and I'm not wedded to it, is essential, because it's really hard for, particularly when you're starting from scratch, for a funder, whether it's a philanthropic funder or a government funder, to drop into a community and say, hey, we want to do shared decision making here, without an organisation that can sit in the middle and support the structure of that relationship and do the facilitation, make sure that the data is in place to enable both sides of the decision-making table to understand the issue from the same perspective, do the monitoring and evaluation and accountability work that's associated with that shared decision-making arrangement. So you can't just expect that we can wave our hands and go, more shared decision-making, please. It does require an investment in the local infrastructure to support funders to be able to engage appropriately and respectfully with community. That does require funding. That's just the reality of it. And it also requires a real commitment to change some of the conventional behaviours of funders that are not geared towards shared decision making. And I think Eugene's organisation is a phenomenal example of that. To the earlier question about champions, there is lots of energy in the Commonwealth government and state and territory governments to really genuinely think about partnership approaches to the design, delivery and implementation of services. The Commonwealth government over a number of years has develop some partnership guides and frameworks and tools that talk about, how do we shift the behaviour and incentives that public servants operate under, that politicians and ministers operate under, so that we can make shared decision making easier, not impossible, but easier. And that will create the environment where more of these arrangements get taken up, and we'll see more success from them over the longer term.
Yeah. Amy, did you want to chime in on some of this? Because Luke picked up part of the question, but it is, how do community organisation get funding to do shared decision making?
Yeah.
And how would you demonstrate the backbone, the
Yeah,
value of them?
it's a really good question, and it is a real challenge for place-based initiatives, because a lot of what we do is that unseen work, that heavy lifting behind the scenes. It's about elevating others, convening, collaborating, but without that social infrastructure in place, as Luke was saying, there is no trusted person for funders to work with, or, when researchers are coming to town, and we're a bit like your community, we've had more pilots than Qantas. And so you sort of feel this responsibility. We've got this 1,000 conversations data. How do we use that to share it so that we're not putting too much strain on community as well? But yeah, look, I think, how do you resource it? It's a real challenge. I think the data is key, the strong governance is key, which I've touched on. But I think in terms of measuring the impact, it is a real challenge. And I think social return on investment's a great tool that we use but it does focus somewhat on the throughput of families and children participating in our program. So we've been sort of challenged with this, how when your job is to be invisible and to be the glue in a community, how do you then speak about the value of that a backbone brings? And I think community sees it in times of crisis here. Lighthouse had 350 volunteers leading a food response in the floods. That's the value of the social infrastructure, but it shouldn't take a crisis to make the invisible visible. So, look, I think we're doing some really interesting work with Place at the moment in exploring this conundrum with Impact Lab to look at what is the full strength that a backbone brings. It's easy in our work, it's easy to look at what a volunteer brings to a program. It's easy to look at their contribution in a dollar figure sense, but what does that bring to the individual and their health and wellbeing outcomes by volunteering? What does it bring to a community, to the social cohesion aspects and prosperity of a region, when you've got an enabling backbone that can coordinate and connect people to opportunity and leverage that goodwill and social capital that exists in a community? So I'm really excited about how this new sort of methodology that we're working through, as I said, Place and Impact Lab have been working with Lighthouse to better articulate this and work with us to find a new method and a new way of telling that impact story, so that we can hopefully make it more easy to make the invisible visible to funders.
Yeah, the invisible work is really hard because people don't see that. It's behind the scenes and pushing forward conversations that it's like, we are doing work, we're just not out there, and you can't see the work that we're actually doing, because that's the reality. We're learning the Macleays 3 years in to doing our work right now.
Yes.
The backbone team's getting really activated, and the work we're doing with our action groups, which will form our community strategy. So we've had to semi-justify the last 18 months of where have you been and what have you been doing. But you can't demonstrate, you can't show the invisible work, because it's all that, the data evidence and all the behind the scenes stuff.
Yes, yeah. No, it's very critical foundational work.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you all again one more question, and then we'll start to wrap up, because we're getting close to running out of time. So from your perspective, what's one key takeaway that you have from your experience of putting shared decision making into practice? And I'll start with you, Eugene, because you already took the mic off.
You saw. Thank you. It's a practice. And I think the thing about shared decision making is that you really have to understand your part in that process. And you need to understand where you're making shared decision, devolved decision and shared decision making work, and what contribution you're making that is preventing it from happening. So there's a real need for anyone who's in the space to understand their part in that process, and to look at it as a practice and be humble.
Amy?
Yeah, I think, much to that point, it's about leaving your ego at the door. It's not always going to be easy. Sometimes it's messy, but it's the right way to work, and you just get so much better outcomes when you work in this way. So, I think, it's just our way. It's in our DNA here at Greater Shepparton Lighthouse. So it's just very obvious to us that we are not the experts, and our community, their lives, people are experts in their own lives. They know what they need. Sometimes they just need us to get out of the way. So again, that convening role is really, really key.
Yeah. And you, Luke?
If you're not uncomfortable, you're doing something wrong.
Totally agree. Totally agree. So that brings us to the end of our webinar this afternoon. Can I just say marangbu to our panellists? They have been amazing, sharing their lived experience and knowledge with us this afternoon. So to Luke and to Amy and Eugene, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Jo.
Joe. Thanks.
If you haven't already listened to the podcast, I would strongly encourage you to do that. All you have to do is search Making Place Matters in your favourite podcast app and give it a listen to. I sit and listen. I would listen to one of them, which Catherine Little was talking about, the plane and the taking off, and how that's about trust and building relationships and all of that stuff. For me, I talk about the dirt road, that, we're often cruising down the highway and then all of a sudden we come up against the dirt road because we've had a change in leadership in one or two key organisations, and we have to go through the potholes and we have to get the stones thrown at us in order to move in the direction that we need to get back onto the freeway again. So, we have so many analogies too, because we're coming up through winter. But so those insights that they're sharing, their experience of working on the ground with communities, for communities, is amazing. But just a reminder that today's session, we will post up on the Place website any of the questions that have come through that we didn't get to answer today, and that this will be posted there. So can I just say again, thank you very much, and marangbu from me by giving me the opportunity to moderate. But enjoy the rest of your day, and Balu, we'll see you later. Thank you.